This man overheard on the radio that a 12-man reconnaissance team was pinned down by the North Vietnamese, so he hops onto the next available helicopter. With only a knife and a med bag, flies out there. They can't land, so he has to jump off the helicopter, run through open field. In the process, he's shot, stabbed, hit with shrapnel from grenades, goes into hand-to-hand combat, but ends up saving 8 lives and protecting classified information. Today we're going to be talking about Roy Benavidez, aka That Mean Mexican. Roy was born on August 5th, 1935 in Texas. He would be orphaned by the age of 7 after both parents passed away from tuberculosis. He would then go to live with his aunt and uncle alongside 8 cousins. Look, I know how difficult it can be just to take care of 1 or 2 kids. I couldn't imagine how expensive or difficult it would be with 9 kids. Holy moly. Which means everyone in the family had to pitch in to help make this work, including 7-year-old Roy. They were poor and any amount of money would help. The kids would go to school, they were pushed to make good grades, and then in the evenings they all had to pitch in and do a job to help support the family. And Roy's first job would be shining shoes. The family would also spend time on a farm, picking cotton and other crops. I'm starting to notice a trend here. It seems like all the badass soldiers back in the day had a lot in common. Starting with they were poor, they experienced loss at a young age, and they had to work on a farm. I mean, most of these kids that turned out to be these men had no choice but to grow up tough and to grow up quick. Roy's military life would start at the Texas National Guard in 1952. In 1955, Roy would switch over to active duty Army and head out to training. After training, he would be sent to Korea shortly after the Korean War. He would be manning the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. He would also spend some time in Germany. In 1959, he would attend military police training at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and graduate. Later that year, he would complete airborne school at Fort Benning. Roy would be assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. In 1965, Roy would be deployed to Vietnam as an advisor. Here, he would be helping train the South Vietnamese to fight against the North and communism. While on patrol with the South Vietnamese, he would end up stepping on a landmine. He would wake up at the Clark Air Force Base, paralyzed from the waist down. When Roy arrived back in Texas, they broke the worst of the news to him. He was told that he may never walk again due to the severe damage on his spine. Roy had other plans though. Late at night, he would start the process of learning to walk again. He would start with very basic movements, wiggling his toes and moving his feet. Then he would crawl up against a wall, pull himself up, and try to train his legs to once again bear weight. And in the process, his fellow soldiers in the hospital with him were giving him words of encouragement. In a year's time, Roy would do what the doctors thought was impossible. He would walk out of that hospital, even though he recounted being in extreme pain. If you're not already impressed, buckle up, because you're fixing to be. Most men would have considered being able to walk out of that hospital a huge success. But to Roy, it was just a starting point. Roy would return to the 82nd Airborne and aggressively pursue his physical conditioning. You see, Roy didn't train until he could walk. He was training to be able to fight again. According to Army accounts, Roy could barely walk whenever he first returned. But within months, he was already getting in 10-mile runs with a rucksack. He was training relentlessly, even though he was in bad pain. Once physically capable, Roy sought an even tougher challenge. He entered Special Forces training. You see, he wasn't looking for an easy gig to where he could push some paper. He wanted to get back into the fight. And he wanted one of the toughest jobs that the Army had to offer. He returned to Fort Bragg to train for the elite Army Special Forces. He would complete their selection process and training as a weapons expert. He would be accepted into the 5th Special Forces Group and volunteered for the top secret detachment B-56 Studies and Observation Group in Vietnam in January of 1968. SOG teams conducted cross-border reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, and other secret operations. And their casualty rates were amongst some of the highest in the Vietnam War. In 1968, the loss rates were so high that 100% of them would at least get injured one time, and 50% would be killed in action. And even though SOG teams spent most of their time behind enemy lines, they also bolstered one of the highest kill ratios in Army history, reaching as high as 158 to 1 by 1970. On May 2nd, 1968, Roy was at Loch Nim when a reconnaissance team operating near Cambodia come under heavy attack. Instead of running into scattered enemy forces, they were facing hundreds of North Vietnamese soldiers. The 12-man team was quickly pinned down. Now, Roy would overhear this on the radio, so he did what Roy does. He grabbed his knife, a med bag, and hopped on the next helicopter that was going to the 12-man team. However, whenever they arrived, the helicopter couldn't land, so Roy had to jump off, sprint 75 meters across open field. In the process, he would be shot and hit with shrapnel from grenades. Whenever he finally made it to the team, he realized that they were either dead or seriously wounded. The team leader was incapacitated and had classified documents on him. The radio operator was down and the enemy forces were closing in. Over the next few hours, Roy would drag the wounded back to an extraction point, go and retrieve the dead, go and retrieve the classified documents so that they wouldn't fall into enemy hands. Direct helicopter movement, call out airstrikes, provide water to his wounded soldiers, and give them ammo to anyone that was able to help fight. And every single trip he made was super dangerous. The entire time, they were under heavy fire. Roy would put down some smoke, and the first helicopter would finally be able to land. From here, Roy would help load up all the wounded and retrieve the dead. In the process, he went to go retrieve the classified documents from the team leader's body. However, the helicopter pilot would be shot and mortally wounded, and the helicopter would crash. Roy would then have to help unload all the wounded and set up a defensive perimeter. From here, Roy would call in more airstrikes and gunship support to help hold the position until they could get another helicopter to land. At some point during this mess, a North Vietnamese soldier would charge at Roy from behind, club him. They would go into hand-to-hand combat. Roy would be stabbed. He also took a butt of the rifle to the face, breaking his jaw. But Roy would end up stabbing him to death. Finally, a second helicopter was able to land. Roy would help load up all the wounded, the dead. He would run back across the field to retrieve some more classified documents. In the process, he would be shot in the thigh and stomach. He would finally make it back to the helicopter, and from there they would have to drag him on. Roy would receive a total of 37 wounds from this fight. Grenade shrapnel, gunshot wounds, stabs, blunt objects, you name it. Now, as you can imagine, Roy was in critical condition. The blood around his eyes had dried, causing him to not be able to open his eyes. His jaw was broken, so he wasn't able to speak, and his body was so badly beaten from all those fights that he could barely move. At one point, the doctors were zipping him up in a body bag. His friend had the doctor check for a heartbeat one last time. Roy did the only thing that he could do. He spit blood directly up into the doctor's face, just to let him know he was alive so that he wouldn't be zipped up in that body bag. Roy would return to Brooke Army Medical Center at Fort Sam Houston in Texas once again. He would endure another lengthy recovery. Roy would continue to serve in the Army, although his combat days were over. After more than 2 decades of service, he would retire from the Army as a Master Sergeant in 1976. For his actions, Roy initially received the Distinguished Service Cross. His commanders thought he would die from the 37 wounds he received in battle and wanted to ensure he received a high-level decoration before he died. So they rushed to get him the Distinguished Service Cross, as the Medal of Honor took time. Once he survived, his former commander would petition for an upgrade. However, this come with some obstacles. Obstacle 1, congressional time limit. By the time the upgrade process started in 1973, the legal time limit to award the Medal of Honor for Vietnam War actions had expired. They had to appeal before U.S. Congress, and was successful. Obstacle number 2, declassification. The Pentagon initially stonewalled the nomination because the military was hesitant to acknowledge a covert operation in neutral territory. Keep in mind, this battle took place in Cambodia. And obstacle number 3, they needed eyewitnesses. Roy believed that everyone from the battle that would be able to recount his actions were dead. It wasn't until 1980 when Brian O'Connor, the Special Forces team's radio man, was on vacation in Australia and read about the delay in Roy's Medal of Honor. O'Connor would provide a meticulous 12-page eyewitness report verifying Roy's valor. With that in hand, the Army Board would finally approve the upgrade. Roy Benavidez would be awarded the Medal of Honor on February 24, 1981 by President Ronald Reagan. After military life, Roy would often speak to the youth. He wanted them to get a good education and take responsibility for their future. He would also continue to fight to support veterans. In 1983, when disability benefits for many Vietnam vets was threatened, he would travel to Washington and testified before Congress. He argued that veterans who sacrifice for their country should not lose the benefits they depend upon. His efforts helped draw attention to the issue and contributed to preserving those benefits. Roy would also write books. The Three Wars of Roy Benavidez, The Last Medal of Honor, and The Medal of Honor, A Vietnam Warrior's Story. Roy would pass away on November 29, 1998. He passed away at Brooke Army Medical Center, the same hospital where he had twice fought his way back from the brink of death. He was 63 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery. That's it. That's the story of Roy Benavidez, a boy who grew up poor. Parents passed away at a young age, worked on a farm and shined shoes to help support his family, served his country in the Army, learned to walk again after stepping on a landmine, ran into battle with a medical bag and a knife to help his fellow soldiers, take 37 wounds, which put him on the verge of death to save them, spit in a doctor's face just to show that he was still alive, fight through another lengthy recovery, finally receive the Medal of Honor, provide guidance to the youth, and fight for veteran benefits.